I don't see anybody else on here with us yet, though.
Oh,
There they are. Debbie's on with us, and I see Dan and Susan, and I think Ingrid's on here.
All right, folks. Well, listen, good to have everybody along with us. Let's go ahead and pause and bow our heads for prayer. Father, we want to thank you so much for bringing us again to this place and preserving our lives for yet another day, another week in which to come and to open your book, to praise you for all the many wonderful blessings that you've done. And so here we are because of who you are. And so thank you. We do ask and pray that you'll guide and direct in our study today. We're thankful that we have the opportunity to plant seeds with those who tune in, as well as those who watch afterwards. All around the world, people catch a glimpse, hopefully, of who you are and exactly what you're doing. We want to thank you, Lord, for giving us that opportunity. Also, you have provided us health and strength and well-being throughout the week, and we're thankful that we have been able to bring glory and honor to your name by the things that we have been able to do and say. We do want to also pray the same blessing on all those who are tuning in, and we ask these things in Jesus' wonderful name and for his sake. Amen and amen. Good.
Come on in, have a seat.
So you stealthy lady?
Hello.
Stealthy lady. Sit wherever you like.
Have a seat.
It's good to see
You're
you.
not on camera, don't worry.
Yeah. Okay.
She's like court orders, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, good to have you guys joining in with us, and of course, it's my time to kind of spout off a little bit. And
We always start our Sabbath meetings with a rant.
yeah.
I got some water.
You know, over the past couple of weeks, I've been
You want just
reading
water? Or
through
you want
a
body armor?
book called
Sure.
Prophets and Kings,
Okay.
going through this whole series. And I want to notice several similarities between Nehemiah's rebuilding the wall. You know, of course, the Jews were exiled to Babylon for 70 years, and then the emperor, the kings in Babylon were sympathetic because of some of the prophets there that they chatted with, particularly Daniel and Ezra, Nehemiah, and so forth.
Probably some Jeremiah as well.
Jeremiah, yeah.
He was kind of
And-
buddies with some of them.
Yeah, and I think he was left actually in Jerusalem, or close by Jerusalem, whereas Daniel was off in Babylon. But anyway, the long and short of it is, God used his ambassadors to reach them, and they were sympathetic to the Jewish cause, and they allowed a portion, a remnant, to go back, eventually start the process of rebuilding. Well, Nehemiah at one point was in charge of a lot of that. And what I noticed was a lot of similarities between that circumstance back then and the circumstance that we find ourselves in currently, even right now. And let me just share a couple things with you that will help you to understand why I came to that conclusion. And I think I finished up with this. Particular paragraph last week. Talked about one of the things that they wanted to do, or that they needed to do, of course, in ancient times, is they had to have a wall to offer a means of protection against their adversaries and enemies. And it says here that the builders were soon beset by more active opposition. There was opposition, people in the surrounding areas that didn't want the Jews back there securing Jerusalem as a stronghold, and so they had opposition. And it says they were compelled to guard, the Jews were compelled to guard continually against the plots of their adversaries, who, professing friendliness, sought in various ways to cause confusion and perplexity and to arouse distrust. And you know, when we think of what's been going on over the last 4 years here in our own country, we can see that when Donald Trump was elected president in 2016, right away, I mean, even before he actually took the oath of office, there was an incredible amount of resistance and, of course, perplexity from the deep state. Because you got to remember, you know, the deep state has been trying for probably 200 years, ever since this country was established as a constitutional republic. They've been trying for that amount of time to subvert our Constitution and to bring us back under the globalist umbrella. Well, of course, now we're at the place now where it's become a lot more obvious over the past probably 15 or 20 years. It's become a lot more obvious that doing it in a stealthy manner anymore. They're kind of right out in the open, promoting, you know, the New World Order, the One World System, whatever you want to call it. This is where the Bible says that humanity would ultimately go. Revelation chapter 13, that beast that comes up out of the sea, is a universal type power. At least it's pictured in that. Well, the globalists were so used to having their own way and moving things along, you know, incrementally to that place that, you know, they had little roadblocks here and there. But then, of course, Trump came along, and Trump was not one of them. And that's the thing that disconcerted them the most. He was an outsider. He's somebody that couldn't be bought and paid for. They couldn't get leverage on him. So he could kind of do what he wanted to do. And he's trying to secure a future for his family, for his kids, his grandkids, et cetera, and for the rest of those who are in the conservative camp, you know, the Bible believers with the guns and all that kind of thing. Not wanting to go down the globalist road, you know, the George Orwell's 1984, the police state kind of thing. And we've lost a lot of independent freedoms because of the situation with Homeland Security. Whole 9 yards that came about after 9/11. So for 20 years, we've been in the throes of really sacrificing our freedoms tremendously. But at any rate, here we have Nehemiah dealing with the same thing. So-called friends of the Jews were the ones that were foremost. You know, I was thinking about that. You know, how many people has Trump had to fire? How many people did Trump have to discover, realized these people are working against me? They're not really working for the American people or for the administration. So the same thing happened back then is happening right now. And it says that they endeavor to destroy the courage of the Jews. And that's what's happening right now. What's happening right now with this election, it was just replete with fraud across the board. In fact, I would dare say that if Joe Biden ended up with 30 million votes, I would be surprised. I think 50 million of his so-called votes, I think, are fraudulent. And I think Trump probably got over 90 million.
We shall see, maybe.
But at any rate, yeah, I mean, they would have to do a nationwide redo of the whole thing, and I think they really should. I think the Supreme Court ought to step in and say, this is so much fraud in so many different ways, we're going to redo it. No machines. You have 3 days to go and vote in person. You vote on a paper ballot. The Republican and Democrats are there to watch the whole process. And listen, the Dems, the Democratic Party, ought to be foremost in wanting to
keep the
process legitimate. They ought to, because listen, if they somehow steal this election, they will have 100 million people in this country. They don't want anything, and
they can make it very difficult for them to do.
And the American people,
unless they lock us down and force.
Well, listen, the American people have the ability to make or break any corporation. If everybody tomorrow stopped going to Walmart, right? In 1, 2, 3 months, they would be gone.
Mm-hmm.
They would be gone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the American people have the ability to do that. And if you've got organizations and companies that are supporting what the DNC and what these people are standing for and doing, hey, listen, put the list out there, and they can be boycotted by 100 million people, by a third of the country, and things will happen. Things will happen very quickly. But at any rate, it's just interesting to see how history repeats itself, and that's just what we're dealing with here. There's a well, they call it an agenda. The agenda that's being played right now, it's a PR type of warfare that's going right now, psychological warfare. Let's everybody just keep saying that Biden is the president-elect. He's the president. He doesn't even have 270 electoral votes anymore because North Carolina was put in Trump's category. So they were pulled from his. He only has like 253, I think. So he still doesn't even have the 270. But at any rate, you got a discouragement campaign that's going on there, just like
I've been seeing a bunch of stuff that he has 270.
Pardon me?
I saw a bunch of different things, like all of the different areas.
The media is trying to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like I've seen like 70 different areas, but they also don't. None of them have the same numbers either.
Well, the mainstream
some of them
media.
are saying 273. Some of them are saying 279. Mainstream
media and big tech and whatnot. They're all complicit in the plot. Okay, and it's been something that's plotted probably 4 years at least
Oh, yeah.
to take him down. It says they even formed conspiracies to draw Nehemiah into their toils and so forth. False-hearted Jews were found ready to aid in treacherous undertaking. So they even will find people that are willing to kind of go traitor and turncoat on their conservative principles just because maybe they're bribed and that kind of thing, or they have leverage against them. So, you know, Nehemiah back here has so much going against him, just like Trump does today. But, you know, when I read it, and
Start a conservative news network.
the conservative
Yeah, see,
news
like,
network.
stuff like this doesn't make sense at all. That Biden's gone up almost 100 electoral votes, and Trump has gone up 15 in all this time.
Yeah, that's
Like, he had this huge wave. Yeah.
To be honest with you, the mainstream media is
If people were actually split, you should see both the numbers growing together.
spinning a total BS story.
But Trump
okay?
literally had no growth for like 4 or 5 days at all, while Biden was just exploding.
They
Votes and
were
stuff.
even willing to try to get the emperor, the Persian monarch here. It says the report spread that Nehemiah was plotting against the Persian monarch. So, you know, any kind of story they can spin to paint Trump or his supporters in a negative light, they're going to go ahead and do that.
You
But
can see there's nothing new under the sun.
Nothing
the
new.
tactics of the enemy are the same.
Right. One of the other things I wanted to bring out.
If he can't win by persecution, he wins by lying and deception.
Right. Now here's another thing that was interesting.
He tries to win.
Let me just share this. It says, faithful men in devoting these, let me go back here. It says, the Lord had commanded Israel through Moses that every third year a tithe be raised for the benefit of the poor. And a further provision had been made in the suspension of agricultural labor. That's the Shemitah cycle every 7th year. The land would lay fallow. And its spontaneous, or what it would produce spontaneously, was left to those in need. So people would go and they would collect. The poor were allowed to just go through anybody's field and collect what they needed at that point because it wasn't being planted and so forth and harvested. Faithfulness in devoting these offerings to the relief of the poor and to other benevolent uses would have tended to keep fresh before the people the truth of God's ownership of all and their opportunity to be channels of blessing. It was Jehovah's purpose that the Israelites should have a training that would eradicate selfishness and develop breadth and nobility of character. So, you know, God had a purpose in everything that he established with the economy of Israel. And, of course, what we found during the Trump administration is that he was foremost in trying to improve the lives of the lower classes, the Hispanics, the black community, you know, anybody that was, you know, the welfare recipients.
He's been the most unprejudiced, unbiased president we've ever had.
So here you had him promoting these very same things, trying to bring them back to a measure of self-respect and develop their character and to eradicate selfishness among people. So I mean, you know, charitable donations were you know, through the roof. People were stepping in, they were helping, they were following the lead of their leader, of the leadership. Well, God forbid, what happens if we get a criminal family in the White House, right? It's all that's all about total selfishness. That's
when
total
you see
antithesis.
what happened to Israel when the kings became corrupt.
Exactly.
The corrupt kings demoralized the people. The temple was in disrepair. People stopped coming for services.
Well, you just look at how quickly Obama's administration turned the country down as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was almost.
There goes the
almost
neighborhood.
shocking.
There goes the
It's
neighborhood.
almost shocking to think of, like, just the transition from, like, when I was younger at his first presidency and then just seeing the moral decay of society happen so rapidly.
Now
in a very
they're
quick span.
thinking because of what they've discovered about this Dominion software that was running the voting system.
Yeah.
This software has been in use. It was developed by a company in Venezuela. We know how their elections went.
Guess where our
And it's been
election
used
results?
in multiple countries, and we were using it here. And it has the ability it has kind of a logarithm built into it that when one party that you don't want to win gets a little edge, it will take votes from that party
and
and
switch them
put them
over.
over to the other one.
Yeah.
And we saw it happen in real time.
We saw actually watched it happen
Watching it on the screen. You could watch, you know, 19,000 votes went from Trump to Biden, the exact same amount in the split
Just
second.
a little bit, bloop.
Yeah, just like that.
You wouldn't have caught it if it hadn't been for the fact that you could
They
go
were
frame by
monitoring
frame
and
on
watch the
on
live
And
count.
monitoring
video.
the results
Yeah.
there. And not only that, but our election results went to Spain and
Yes.
from our
Our database
Our
is
database
all
is
processed through Spain and Germany.
Germany,
Why
yeah.
would any of our information go to
Need to
Exactly.
pass through Spain and Germany.
And
Yeah.
the company that started Dominion is this guy, Lord Malloch from England, who is the second in command in George Soros' organization.
Oh, go
uh,
figure.
So here
Oh,
you've
yeah.
got, you know,
Surprise,
Soros
surprise,
is all
right?
over it.
I'm shocked.
And our
I'm
voting
so
system's
shocked at
here, you know,
sources.
Pelosi is connected to it, Feinstein's connected to it, Clintons are connected to
Oh
it.
yeah, it's
There's
just
no
so shocking.
possible
Just so
risk
shocking.
of election fraud.
Stinking.
So, yeah, that too. All right, here's one other thing that I wanted to bring out here. You know, Nehemiah, it would have been so inspiring to know a man like Nehemiah. He was God's man, and he was leading this endeavor to get Jerusalem reestablished.
Who
and
was the
rebuilt.
king before Nehemiah?
Nehemiah was a prophet.
Oh,
Okay.
that's right. So who's the current king?
There is
Right.
no king of Judah or Israel at this time.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
Nehemiah, they're currently under
They
Persian
probably-
occupation.
Yeah, they probably
Medo-Persian.
had some leadership there. But anyway, I wanted to read this
Medo-Persian
because here's another thing that I found to be interesting as a parallel. It says Nehemiah showed them that he himself, being invested with authority from the Persian king, might have demanded large contributions for his personal benefit. But instead of this, he had not taken even that which justly belonged to him, but had given liberally to relieve the poor in their need.
Man, you'd think somebody was
Wow.
looking at that playbook.
Wow, you would think so. So here's Trump coming in and saying, I'll come in and I will work for nothing and I will donate my salary every month to a certain need, you know, within the government. So yeah, again, you start to see all these parallels, and Trump is really a modern day
Nehemiah.
Nehemiah.
Did you get into his being single-minded? Nehemiah was so determined on building the wall that every time they would try to distract him and get him to come someplace else where they could take advantage of him,
Right,
he'd say, I can't be bothered, I've got stuff to do.
Right.
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 He stayed focused.
He was focused.
Yes.
Yeah. He was loyal and focused and devoted.
Notice here, and this is, you mentioned building the wall. It says as the time of the end draws near, Satan's temptations will be brought to bear with greater power upon God's workers. He will employ human agents to mock and revile those who build the wall. But should the builders come down to meet the attacks of their foe, this would but retard the work. You know, and Trump, from the very beginning of his candidacy, talked about building the wall. And I think it was more than just a physical wall that he was talking about building. He was talking about building a wall of integrity for our system and for our Constitution and for our principles, conservative
Trying
principles.
to restore the values the country was started
And
on.
many of the builders started to come down that he had to kind of get rid of, right? Et cetera, et cetera. It says here, it says, the builders, should endeavor to defeat the purposes of their adversaries, but they should not allow anything to call them from their work. Truth is stronger than error, and right will prevail over wrong. Now that doesn't mean that this stealing the election won't happen. Okay, and we'll have to put up with Biden for at least. At least as long as they allow him to live. I don't think he'll live long, actually, because they want really Harris in there as president to push the leftist agenda. So I don't think Biden would. I think he's just been a Trojan horse to bring in the leftist agenda.
But there's also a possible that the conservative element, who are in there in the millions right now in D.C. in a rally for Trump, they may also rise up and take action in some capacity. People are fed up. People are disgusted by the.
You mean a true revolution?
Yeah.
A true revolution.
It's
you
just strange
know,
to see people in this mode, but there are a lot of
yeah.
people who are talking about it.
Yeah, I can understand the frustration. I really can, because especially when you don't win it legitimately. You know, now if it was a legitimate win, nobody can really say anything about that, because the majority of the states and so forth have kind of spoken, and that just shows you and reveals to you the thinking and the mentality and the short-sightedness that a lot of people have that are allowed to vote. Okay, but
It's assuming that these votes are legitimate votes.
But I'm saying, but in this case here, there's so many question marks about the legitimacy.
You're going to talk like
No,
Joe
no,
Biden.
That's all, folks.
That's all, folks. We will erase that from the recording.
Yeah,
But at any rate,
I don't know how
no.
to
But
do
you
it.
heard it live. You heard it live, so good for you. It's just one of these things where truth ultimately will win out over error. It may not seem like it this time around, but ultimately God is in control of things, and ultimately God's truth will win out. It's just that those who believe in God, those who believe in His righteousness and His Son, will simply have to persevere. And the Bible talks about us persevering to the end, but He has promised to be with us always, even unto the end. So no matter what happens, we can trust that our stand for God should never falter, and we know that He's always in our corner, and we know that we are on the winning side regardless of what it looks like, what it appears. We know the Bible tells us that the majority will forsake the truth, so we're to expect that. We know that there'll be a time of trouble such as never was. We are to expect that. We shouldn't be shocked when these kind of things happen, but we should just say, okay, Lord, we still have a mission to accomplish. What would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say? We'll even stand before leadership. We'll stand before rulers and whatnot. And God says, don't worry, in that day, in that moment, I will give you the very things to say. So we can trust that God will be with us, because if He's with us, who can really be against us? We have all of His creation behind us. And I could keep going on and on and on. There's lots more underlined things in this book, but we'll save it for next time. Elijah, I've taken a little bit of your time, so why don't you go ahead and move us in the right direction.
It's all relevant and pretty close together in historical
I thought it was kind of
perspective.
fascinating just to see the parallel with the story of Nehemiah and what's going on in the government today.
Yeah, absolutely astounding.
Yeah, I mean,
Sounds like an article we need to put together and
He's
put up online.
building the wall, too.
Trump-a-Maya.
And he didn't even take a salary. I mean, again, it's so blatant, that here was God trying to reestablish Israel because He had a purpose for them. And God has a purpose for all of the remnant in His
And if
kingdom.
you look at Revelation 13, the United
There's a-
States
there's a-
may have a very prominent role in last day events. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that, and even though that may mean that the leadership may take things in the wrong direction, it also implies that what's going to happen is God's people will rise up and be a real light.
Right, and I know people might not want to hear this, but really the role that the United States is playing will be that they become the Babylon, the spiritual Babylon, that are trying to pull people away from the truth. And the Democratic Party, which is standing on a platform of death, they will ultimately be. I mean, it's truly darkness over light is what it is. And so if we keep that in mind and know that we're still in the midst of a great controversy that the Bible speaks about, then we just have to trust God more and more as each day goes on. And that's what it really will come down to.
God is in control, and Revelation 14:12 says, "The remnant people, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus."
Yeah, and a lot of times when we hear that verse, we focus on
Keep the commandments.
They're commandment keepers, but we kind of maybe just swing over the idea of being patient. And patience is going to be absolutely godly patience is going to be necessary.
And
Absolutely.
faith of Jesus.
Yeah, faith of Jesus, not faith in Him,
No,
faith of Him.
Of Him.
And that's a faith that He had with His Father. That's a covenant-keeping faith. The covenant that they entered into was one by faith. So,
We shall persevere
yeah.
with God in control.
Yeah.
So we're in 2 Kings.
Yep, 2 Kings chapter 25. We're finishing up the last chapter of the book.
Okay.
And then from here on, I suppose we can figure out where we'll go after this. But yeah. So, finished up last week talking about the last little bit of Zedekiah's reign as he rebelled against the king of Babylon. And all the craziness that followed after that. And Israel just seeming not to learn, not to heed the words of Jeremiah or Ezekiel telling them, hey, just, let what's going to happen is you're going to go into captivity, settle down, have marry wives and make children, and just because
Right.
you're going to be there for 70 years.
And I would almost interpret what's happening right now as if the scheme ends up being successful by the Democrats. And of course, the courts and the judges will decide that, really. But if it ends up being successful, it would be akin to Israel going into captivity. I mean, we'll feel very much like I'm in captivity with a crime family, leading out as at the helm. And of course, the leftist agenda is totally off the rail. So you're definitely going to feel like you're in captivity. I'll guarantee it. Your freedoms are you think they're eroding now.
Yeah, I mean, well,
I've seen them erode tremendously.
What was Biden saying, just 2 days ago or yesterday? He was basically just talking about how if he gets elected, he's basically going to shut down the country for 6 weeks.
Shut down the country, you have to mask up, whatever you do.
Yeah, he said he's going to mandatory shutdown, whether you like it or not. You're
yeah.
going to stay quarantined and
Yeah,
stuff.
it's going to be...
Being forced.
Yeah.
And really, unless you develop herd immunity over any illness, you're going to always be living in a state of fear,
Yeah.
and you're going to fear one another mostly,
Yeah.
and you're going to always be trying to, what do we have to, how can we restrict people's mobility and their activities? Well, the only thing we can do is just shut everything down. And then once you shut everything down, then you destroy the economy, and that's one of the things they're trying to accomplish with this fake scheme of weaponizing the flu virus. What they want to do is have a financial world reset, and they thought it would come this year, but apparently the Trump had built such a robust economy that it crippled it, it damaged it. But then just recently, and I think the last couple of months, it started to rebound and gain 33% in gains. And so they recognized that, well, we've got to give it a second hit. We've given it one good punch, and that crippled it, but now we've got to give it another good punch to try to take it down. And so we'll see what happens. That's why the Dems are fighting so hard, because this is their very existence that we're talking about here. If they can't pull off this scheme, then they'll be pretty much a party that's dangling in the wind for a good while. Certainly all the leadership that's there now, and they may also be susceptible to criminal penalties and so forth for the treasonous things that they're doing. But the idea is to take the world economy down, number one, you see, and in the process get rid of Trump, take the world economy down, lower the population, start reducing the world population, etc., and move on. The elitists and the globalists, they have an agenda and they have a timetable, and of course then the old devil knows that his time is running out for sure, and of course he's the one that's pulling the strings from behind the scenes, and these people are being played, they don't even know it.
Yeah, for the common good.
Yeah, supposedly.
Supposedly.
So anyway,
And Elijah's time is running out too. So
you'll
we
see
need
what
to
that.
let
See,
him take
this is getting me all wound up.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's a relevant it's a relevant topic, not an irrelevant topic. Starting from verse 1 there.
Which chapter?
Chapter 25
25.
of 2 Kings.
Yeah.
And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, and the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it, and they built forts against it round about. And the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah.
It's a long siege.
Yeah, it means they must have had a pretty good storehouse of stuff on hand.
That was kind of typical. If you had a good fortified city,
Then it was about a
it would take
3-year.
sometimes years to take down a city.
But it's kind of wild to think about a prolonged besiegement like that. 3 years is a pretty long time to be confined somewhere, it seems. But
Just, it was obviously it was inside a big city, but
Yeah.
still, it's The fact that you can't leave your city without fear of death for 3 years.
And just a heads up, but Jerusalem wasn't a big city.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, you could
Not-
walk around all the gates. You can walk around the gates in just a matter of hours. You know, so it's not really a big city at all.
That's
Compared to other
nice.
big cities, anyways.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's no comparison.
And on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. And the city was broken up, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gates between two walls, which is by the king's garden.
Okay, so what that was some people were aware, particularly the royal family, understood that when you went down into Zedekiah's cave, you had of the urban areas, and so you could escape through these underground passageways.
And they
Still there
didn't-
today.
Yeah.
Still there today.
That's really cool. Now the Chaldees were against the city round about, and the king went the way towards the plain. And the army of the Chaldees pursued after the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army were scattered from him. So they took the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon to Riblah, and they gave judgments upon him. And they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with fetters of brass, and carried him to Babylon.
Right. So as people would make their way out of the city underground, right, and soldiers were tearing down the walls and coming in through the gates, or coming in through the gates that they had overcome. You know, the royal family and others were making their way. Those that figured they needed to escape out these tunnel areas. But eventually, I'm sure they had intelligence back then. They realized that this was the situation, and so they ended up being able to track them down to Jericho,
Yeah.
which is a good 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers from Jerusalem, Jericho, down by the Dead Sea.
Some good little jaunt.
Yeah.
That, and I was going to say, this is also a fulfillment of two prophecies that were given by Jeremiah, and I think the other by Ezekiel, relating to the judgment of Zedekiah. That he would both, I think Jeremiah said that he would be taken to Babylon as captive, and Ezekiel said that he would never see Babylon.
Hmm.
So it was kind of two prophecies that seemed at odds
Yeah,
until you
right.
realized what had happened.
His eyes were
Was he was
opened.
both taken to Babylon and he
was
never saw it.
blinded. Yeah, he saw it.
So, and I mean, what a crazy judgment to have brought against you. I mean, to see your
But why did they
kids.
take him to Babylon? Why didn't they just kill him there?
I think to make him suffer. You know, I mean, if you kill a person, it's honestly quite merciful to have been rebelling for 11 years or whatever it was that Zedekiah was doing. You know, and to be putting
Well-
Nebuchadnezzar through this headache.
But also,
I think it made an
but
example
also
of
a
him.
public example to say this is what happens to you if you rebel against.
The one thing that was
That's true,
significant
too.
about Nebuchadnezzar was that he had a policy of allowing people to continue their religious practices. So he didn't interfere with the Jews' ability to continue worshiping.
But he wanted his tax money. His tax
He just wanted
revenue.
his tax money, but he was willing to let them continue living where they lived,
Just
doing
live
what
under
they
tribute,
always
yeah.
did. But you know, that wasn't good enough for Zedekiah. You know, he'd been warned because the prophets had told him
Sure.
that they didn't have to fight against it, and that people would have been safe. But now he brought destruction upon the entire city.
And upon his own family.
Yeah.
You know, and the last thing that Zedekiah ever gets to see were his children being
Children
killed in front of him.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, so that, I mean, it's an extra punishment to
Mhm.
basically see the last thing
Live
that you'll
with that
ever
memory.
witness. Yeah,
Exactly.
it'll be the last thing you ever see,
Yeah.
but you'll get to live on with that in your mind. You know, so it's quite a.
It's a mental
Quite a-
torture.
It is, yeah, but also it's like Dad was saying, you know, trophy king. You know, you bring him in and you keep him captive, and you just get to see, oh look, everybody, here's the mighty ruler of such and such that I deposed, and
Yeah. No, this is
Yeah.
what happens when you don't pay.
yeah, the IRS.
This is what happens when you don't pay your tribute.
And he burnt the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the house of
Did you
Jerusalem.
read it?
Yeah, you skipped that, right?
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Okay. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which is the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, of Babylon came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, as servant of the king of Babylon unto Jerusalem. And he burnt the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and every great man's house burnt he with fire. And all the army of the Chaldees that were with the captain of the guard brake down the walls of Jerusalem round about.
This ought to be a lesson. Do not build your house out of wood. Build it out of stone.
Another
or
lesson
steel.
is don't put your trust in the cities.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean,
Let
there's
the
a.
Lord protect you in the rural areas. Don't build your house in the city.
Yeah.
Well, I think it might was it Ellen White who made the statement regarding the total destruction of Jerusalem after Christ, that not one Christian perished in that invasion.
Because they heard the warning.
Heard
and
the
they
warning
left.
and they left.
Chapter
yeah.
1 of Great Controversy.
Yeah.
Chapter 1.
And so I mean, I think of that situation whenever I read all these stories of Jerusalem being destroyed, these places being destroyed, that that God gave the warning. Obviously, Jeremiah was around preaching this stuff for quite a while,
Sure.
and I'm sure a lot of people left, or something
If
to
you
that
had the
effect.
ability and you could see that this was coming down the road, make the sacrifice and get out.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I believe it's the captain of the guard, Nebuzaradan, that actually ends up helping Jeremiah, because Zedekiah or whoever had put Jeremiah in prison or something to that effect. Seems that he was bound.
Right. He was
And Jeremiah, it relates the story of him coming and basically setting him free and giving him money and telling him, like, go wherever it suits you to go. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting that was the
stories
case.
in there.
Yeah, well, it's also in Jeremiah. He records
Sure,
it as
he
well.
does.
Mhm.
Right.
But I found that to be really interesting that he, the captain of the
You
guard
seem
is
to
here.
have some respect
to
for the prophet.
Yeah,
Right.
and it seems like a lot of these people did, and it's really funny to think about that, because Elsa and I were watching yesterday one of those movies that they try to make about the Bible, and it was about Jonah, and they had all these stupid lines where Jonah's like, God has never sent a prophet to foreign lands, and why would he do this? And I'm thinking, have they never read the Bible? Like they were. You just read literally through Kings, and it talks about Elisha and all the other prophets going all these different places and prophesying to pagan kings and to other nations, and and the king of Egypt apparently received a prophet or a prophecy, probably from a prophet, to go and destroy places, and then Josiah got in the way and got
And
killed.
the original pharaohs had Joseph.
Yeah. So
He was
I
a
mean,
prophet.
yeah. So I it's so silly when they put that in movies like that, where
This
obviously
goes to show that Hollywood needs to be ignored.
Hollywood.
Susan said they saw the handwriting on the wall. People would see what's coming and
Oh,
Yeah.
get out.
Eventually, sure.
But to see that concept is there, that the captain of the king's guard had seen Jeremiah, and then basically sets him up to go and do whatever he wants to go with Gedaliah or to go with him to Babylon. Like, he kind of invited him anywhere, and he's like, we'll make it possible for you to go wherever you want to go. So that's kind of interesting. Verse 10, I think it was.
11.
No, 11, yeah. Now the rest of the people that were left in the city, and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon with the remnant of the multitude, did Nebuzaradan the captain of the guard carry away. But the captain of the guard left of the poor of the land to be vine dressers and husbandmen. And the pillars of brass that were in the house of the Lord, and the bases and the brazen sea that was in the house of the Lord, did the Chaldees break in pieces, and carried the brass of them to Babylon.
There's significant spoil there.
Yeah,
And
and
significant what's not mentioned.
Right.
and the pots and the shovels and the snuffers and the spoons and the vessels of brass
Snuffers.
wherewith they ministered took they away.
Because what had Jeremiah done? He had warned
Of the
the
destruction.
Levites and the priests about what was coming,
And so they
And
took the
instructed them to hide the sanctuary furniture, the Ark of the Covenant particularly, the altar of incense, the table of showbread,
In Jeremiah's
the
room.
altar of, the menorah, and other things.
Goliath's sword.
Told them to put them in a chamber for safekeeping. They hid them for
But if
safekeeping.
you look through this list, those things are not mentioned, but all the
All the little
bowls and
stuff.
All the
Advancing.
bowls, yeah.
Yeah, and the fire pans and the bowls and such things as were of gold, in gold and of silver. In silver the captain of the guard took away. The two pillars, one sea, and the bases which Solomon had made for the house of the Lord, the brass of all these vessels was without weight.
What does
Yeah.
that mean, one C?
I don't know.
It's the word yam, Y-A-M, meaning to roar. But apparently it's used in references in other places regarding the seas, like the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee.
Well, now, what's significant about
Actually,
this?
it was like the bathing bin.
Talks
The
about-
roaring pillar?
Talks about the height of the one pillar is 18 cubits, and the chapiter
Mhm.
upon it was brass, etc. The height of the other was 3 cubits.
Pomegranates,
The wrought work, pomegranate upon the chapiter roundabout, all the brass like unto these had the second pillar. In other words, these pillars, some people theorize, and I guess it's I'm not sure if it's actually been proven, but some people theorize that these pillars were filled with sand, and they acted as a counterweight, right? Because it talks about here the one being without weight. They acted as a counterweight to create a lever system that would allow the priesthood to lower the sanctuary furniture down into Zedekiah's
cave.
cave in the event of an invasion. And so it's
This was kind of their escape chamber for some of the people.
right. In other words, once you
Took those
took
pillars
once
down.
you took the weight out, once you allowed the weight to drain out of these pillars, it allowed the weight of the sanctuary furniture to drop down like a lever system or elevator system into Zedekiah's cave, where they could then be scribed this here, talking about the two main pillars here.
But being such different sizes.
Right,
I mean, one 18 and the other one 3.
right.
Those are pretty significant differences.
Mm-hmm.
3 is hardly a pillar, but yeah, it's about
No,
no taller than
the
a person.
chapiter was 3 cubits. That's part of the. That's like just the part of the pillar.
Okay.
The whole pillar is going to be, the two pillars are going to be about the same size in height, about 18 cubits high.
Okay,
That's about 40 feet or more in height.
That's a big pillar.
Okay, and they're going to be round. They're going to be really round.
Well, the original temple was something like 150 feet tall, wasn't it?
You mean the Solomon's temple?
Solomon's
Temple.
temple. Wouldn't this have been Solomon's temple?
Yeah. Well,
This is after Solomon, isn't it?
Yeah, this
Yeah,
would have been.
should be.
This would have been the
Because
first
this would have
temple.
been the destruction of it, and then
Yeah.
Nehemiah and them.
But see, they were
Ezra.
only after. What they were after was the brass fittings and
And the
stuff,
gold and
the
everything.
gold that was on it. That's why they chopped up the bowl,
The laver.
the laver. They
Because it
chopped
was
that
so
up.
big.
It was big and thick, and so forth.
Wow. And then verse 18 there, and the captain of the guards took Sarai, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, and 3 keepers of the door. And out of the city he took an officer that was set over the men of war, and 5 men of them that were in the king's presence, which were found in the city, and the principal scribe of the host, which mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land that were found in the city. And Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, took these and brought them to the king of Babylon, to Riblah. And the king of Babylon smote them and slew them at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was carried away out of their land.
Wow.
And as for the people that remained in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had left, even over them he made Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, ruler. And what's kind of cool, too, is that Gedaliah was one of the people with Jehoiakim who was counseling him not to burn the scroll of Jeremiah when they were reading it to him.
So the Lord kind of protected him.
Yeah, so he kind of emerges here and comes out on top for a short period of time anyways. And when all the captains of the armies, they and their men, heard that the king of Babylon had made Gedaliah governor, there came to Gedaliah to Mizpah even Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and Johanan the son of Kareah, and Sariah
Yeah.
the son of Tanhumeth. There we go. Mine breaks it up into separate
Yeah.
hyphenated things.
And these 10 night.
Niftathan,
Yeah.
and
Somehow they don't seem
Jaazaniah,
like Israeli sounding names.
the
They don't
son
sound
of
Hebrew.
Maacathite. Well, I mean, they're Maacathites and all these other Thites, and so I think they're from all over. They and their men. And Gedaliah sware to them and to their men, and said unto them, Fear not to be the servants of the Chaldees. Dwell in the land, and serve the king of Babylon, and it shall be well with you, which is what Jeremiah had been talking about for some time.
Yeah.
But it came to pass in the 7th month that Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, of the seed royal, so somehow he's connected to the royal family, came, and 10 men with him, and smote Gedaliah that he died, and the Jews, and the Chaldees that were with him at Mizpah.
Insurrection.
Yeah.
And all the people, both small and great, and the captain of the armies, arose and came to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldees. And it came to pass in the 7th and 13th year of the captivity of Jehoiachin, Jehoiachin,
37th.
yeah, Jehoiachin, that's Jehoiachin's son, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, I guess that's Nebuchadnezzar's father, right? Or is that his son?
Imagine that, evil in the name.
Right.
Evil Merodach Baladan.
He was the son of Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
Okay. In the year that he began to reign, did lift up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, out of prison. And he spake kindly to him, and set his throne above the throne of the kings that were with him in Babylon. And changed his prison garments, and he did eat bread continually before him all the days of his life. And his allowance was a continual allowance given him of the king, a daily rate for every day, all the days of his
I
life.
say, why did he do that?
I guess to help unify nations, maybe? I mean, I see that there could be maybe a political advantage to kind of saying, well, now there is peace between our nations, like not allowing them to have their own nation per se, but maybe to, because I mean, they've got all the people captive there that would have seen Jehoiachin as their king.
Under control.
Why do you think?
Well, it just seems to me like he's conquered this people, and then he's allowing the leader that, like you said, a lot of people
Looked up to them.
maybe looked up to or whatnot. I mean, it's almost like he's incubating an insurrection in his own country. You know, I mean, I'm in one
Actually,
sense.
by elevating him, he would try to prevent an insurrection. Because he's implying that, okay, your leader's being favored and you guys are okay as long as you behave yourselves. You can
Yeah,
live
we're
out your
all
lives in
friends
peace.
here. Let's just be calm.
Well, I'm hoping that was a bit of inspiration there that allowed for that. That was kind of a merciful thing. He could have just as easily got rid of him, and everybody else would have been considered, spoil of war, which was typical.
Well, the thing with Jehoiachin is that I don't believe he really gave them any trouble when he became captive. He was young when he began his reign, and he only reigned a very short time, and then when Nebuchadnezzar had come the first time, he basically gave himself up and took his whole family, and they just walked out and were like, we're yours. And then he took him as prisoner and put Zedekiah in rulership. So it's quite possible.
Scott's got a comment. A commentary on 2 Maccabees 2, 4, and 5. The same
Maccabees, huh?
document also tells how the prophet ordered that the tent and the ark should accompany him, and how he went to the very mountain that Moses climbed to behold God's inheritance. When Jeremiah arrived there, he found a chamber in a cave in which he had put the tent, the ark, and the altar of incense, and then he sealed the entrance. He's saying that's historical record
From
in the book of Maccabees, which isn't necessarily inspired, but it's historical.
Right.
And Susan said the commentary in my Bible says Jehoiakim was the rightful king of Judah.
Jehoiakim or Jehoiachin?
Jehoiachin.
Jehoiachin. Well, he was the one in succession, but the prophecy said that Jehoiakim's posterity would never be king.
Yeah.
And so so that was kind of the deliverance.
Maybe
of that.
also that one of the reasons why he allowed him to live was because he convinced the Babylonian king that if you do away with me, the people will rebel against you. But if you let me live, I can keep them under some kind of control.
That's what I was thinking.
You know?
Another thing that could be feasible in my mind is he could have told them about the different secret passages out of Jerusalem that allowed them to catch Zedekiah and his men trying to leave. I mean, he could have given them all the intel and given them the inside scoop on the empire or whatever. But I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's all
so
speculation, but I
Right.
mean, I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
like, what would you do to earn that kind of favor
Yeah.
from somebody?
Yeah.
You know, show them that you're loyal by helping them apprehend the people in the nation or whatever, you know.
It's really hard to know because we aren't given a whole lot of information about it.
Well, he's even paid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's
he's
paid.
given a daily allowance and
Right.
his food's taken care of, his clothes. Yeah, he basically goes right back to being kind of a part of the royal gang. So yeah, it's kind of, and I guess the implication is that he just kind of integrates into Babylon.
All right. So what's the real lessons that we learn from all this history of the succession of people that came and went? What are the lessons that we come away with concerning this history? I mean, is there a real benefit for people to review this kind of thing? The answer obviously is yes, but I mean,
What is the take
You're not
on?
supposed to ask questions that can be answered with yes or no. You're supposed to ask questions that.
Can be answered with questions.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of very interesting.
Well, that's what I'm saying. What do we learn from it?
I think one is that God is ultimately the one working things out. You know, for judgment and for whatever. Because I know last week I was showing us where in Jeremiah he used the expression that this captivity was for the good of some. That this was not a bad thing necessarily. That it was a judgment on the nation for the sins of Manasseh, even though Manasseh repented. In the later part of his life, it was so great that it ended up.
But like I said, that
Causing a
Nebuchadnezzar
decline.
was one of the rulers who allowed them to continue their religious practices. A lot of other countries would not have done that.
Yeah.
Would have expected you to integrate into the paganism.
I mean, up
Feeding the
until the
crowd.
whole image thing, you know, that was so.
Which only happened because of the dreams and stuff that he
Yeah.
had, those unusual dreams. But up until that time, he was content to let all of the people, whatever religion they had, he felt they were happier if they could continue what they were comfortable with, which is an unusual approach for any king to take.
There's prophecy.
Well, and it seems to be somewhat common for the major world empires that ruled to do that, because each empire in succession, to an extent, did all of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Medo-Persians also allowed that until certain laws with respect to that. Even Rome allowed that, obviously, because they allowed
Until they
Jerusalem.
thought the Jews were raising up an insurrection.
Yeah, because they were kept waiting for a Messiah who was going to kick Rome out. So that sounds like insurrection to me.
Yep.
You know.
Bring that comment.
Prophecy,
Hmm.
as Elijah had mentioned, a prophecy in how they slew out, how Zedekiah
Mhm.
wouldn't be able to see. What had you mentioned about that?
Yeah.
And Jeremiah, wasn't it mentioned in Jeremiah?
Jeremiah and I think Ezekiel might be the one who mentions that he wouldn't see it. And Jeremiah mentioned that he would be taken captive to Babylon.
Okay.
They both may have mentioned it, but
Yeah, I mean, it's a
It
lot of
had to be
prophecy.
something that he wondered about when he had two what he considered to be conflicting prophecies.
Yeah. But
Well,
like,
it's-
how could I be taken to Babylon and not see it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Susan says
Don't
that
ask.
the commentary further says that cuneiform tablets of that period have been found, mentioning the provisions that were supplied to Jehoiachin and his 5 sons.
Right.
Wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty unique.
Well, no, because there would have been like a record, they would have chronicled that.
Well, just
part
cool
of
to be able
the
to
kingdom.
find that
Yeah,
that could be
so-
preserved despite Babylon being destroyed.
Sure. What kind of time period do you think transpired over the course of the First and Second Kings there? How much time do you think we're talking about there?
It was several hundred years, 300 or 400 years, somewhere in that neighborhood.
See, one of the lessons I see, because we watched and what we
Could it
actually
possibly be
reviewed,
490?
what we actually
I don't think it was
reviewed.
that long, but
Well, I mean, what we reviewed, though, in a somewhat of a detailed fashion, was Israel doing it right and then Israel doing it wrong. Israel doing it right, Israel doing it wrong, and wrong, and wrong, and wrong, right and
Actually,
wrong.
it could be because they violated 70 of the Shemitah years, according
That's
to what it says.
490.
Is that
Yes.
reckoned? Is that reckoned from the time period of the kings or the judges, or?
I don't know. I
Yeah.
just thought it was, if you're thinking it's about 400 and they go into captivity and there's a 490-year prophecy that comes out of this.
Well, we know that from the rebuilding of Jerusalem, unto Christ.
Homework for this week.
We had a 490 period. But anyway, my point was getting back to there was a measure of time there, centuries of time that transpired as we went from one king to the next king, father, son, father, that kind of thing. And so to me, one of the blatant lessons that comes through in all of this is God's perseverance with the people that he had called to raise up to take a message to the world, right? And because of the things we were able to detail in 1st and 2nd Kings, what was that real message? What was the underlying message that was always there that God was trying to get Israel to see and also promote to the nations around them?
This is what happens when you don't follow me.
Well, that's a general
Yeah.
a general statement, but there was something specific that was going on constantly. There was one thing that God was continually warning Israel, the Jews, to stay away from.
Idolatry and child sacrifice?
Well, idolatry. Okay, child sacrifice was a part of the idolatry
Yeah.
system. But God was persevering just century after century with these people. And the thing that was always at issue was a multiplicity of gods or the worship of the God, right? And when we bring that up to today, right, and when we look, Christianity is, we're supposed to be a Christian nation, right? I think because we've had so many in leadership that had a different agenda other than truth and righteousness, right? And we haven't had that for so long within. I mean, to be honest with you, it seems to me. I mean, I'm not a prophet and I'm not a seer, right? But it seems to me, just on the outside, that Trump was one of the guys that uncharacteristically seemed to promote to a greater degree truth and transparency and righteousness, right doing, as opposed to many of the others that were trying to play that role, like Bush.
Pretend.
Like Bush was a pretender.
Pretender.
Bush was part of a crime family as well. So it's that lesson for Israel, I think, is part of our same mandate today. We are to promote the role of a sovereign creator God who is the ultimate merciful Father in heaven, and he deserves our worship, right? Because of him being creator and also redeemer, he deserves our worship. But is idolatry still as prevalent today as it was back there?
Yes.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? We've become a little more sophisticated in our idolatry, but we still have that same issue. That God is still dealing with the same thing. He wants to raise up a people that promote the God of heaven, the merciful, all-powerful, omniscient, omnipresent God in heaven, as opposed to anything else that we would put above him, whether it be a job, other people, whatever, whether it's we put respect or adoration or whatever it might be that we put above God, convenience, all those things we put on a pedestal, usually above God, because we take him for granted. And all through 1st and 2nd Kings, it seemed like we could see the people taking for granted how God wanted to bless them. And when somebody came into leadership that did it right, they received tremendous blessing as a nation. But then when somebody came along that did it wrong, that blessing was God was not able to bless as fully as he probably wanted to, and the people ended up suffering the consequences of their own thinking and actions.
That was an interesting statement that you just said about the convenience above God. So we're not to take things for granted at all.
We shouldn't.
Never.
And I think if we're studying his book, if we're looking at his book,
Those are our lessons.
and we can see how interactive he was with people, and that there was always a mission. He didn't just raise up Israel for no reason. He raised them up to accomplish something specific, and I think that specificity really was attached to him as the God of the universe, and not just the God of Israel. So many people think, round about the nations, they would think, Israel has their God, we have our God, our neighbors over there, they have their gods, etc. But it was always, the push for Israel was always to reverence and worship the true God, the one who is above all. And as he clearly is, because he provides life and health and abilities, and he's providing probationary time.
Yes.
He's giving us even time.
Yeah. Worship is to be in spirit and in truth.
If the enemy had his way, he would have annihilated all of God's people long ago.
Yes.
And we see the examples of this through history with different leaders. Even Nebuchadnezzar.
And it would seem that, based on the starting reigns of Saul going all the way to the last king, Zedekiah, that it is 490 years, give or take a year or two.
Okay. I was just looking up Jehoiachin, just wondered why he was favored. And it said Jehoiachin was given some freedom in Babylon 37 years after his deportation.
Right.
So he'd
So
been
he was
there a long time
quite a
as a
while.
prisoner. And it said, evil Merodach had become king of Babylon, and he spoke kindly to Jehoiachin and gave the imprisoned king a seat of honor at his table and a daily allowance. The tragedy that befell Jehoiachin was predicted by the prophet Jeremiah. God said Jehoiachin would be removed from the throne and be taken to Babylon, where he would die. But the curse upon Jehoiachin went deeper than just his deposition and exile. Record this man as if childless, a man who will not prosper in his lifetime, for none of his offspring will prosper. None will sit on the throne of David or rule any more in Judah. Thus, the line of kings from David's family ended with Jehoiachin, a fact that had ramifications for the Messiah, who was to be the son of David.
Right, he would have to come through
Yeah. So it says it's a strange tale.
Mary's line.
The second wave of exiles, yet released from prison and given a gracious end to his life. He seems to be a man stuck in the middle of history. We don't know what happened during his years in prison or why the king was so kind to him. But what is evident in the story of Jehoiachin is God's righteous judgment as well as his merciful
And
grace.
if somebody was keeping
like that.
track, of the descendants of David, right, they would never think to consider the women at that time. And because when you go into Luke traces the lineage
Of
to
Mary.
Christ from Mary's lineage,
Right.
right? But scholars of the day would never think to have gone there.
Because they were
So-
thinking the line of a man, not...
Right. So
Well, wasn't he also Joseph's
But
lineage?
Joseph's line was legally, but genetically it was Mary's
Mary's
line.
line.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting.
Well, yeah, it's more than interesting because people would have thought, well, the Messiah.
Oh, sorry, Dad.
So the
Sorry.
Messiah-
Oh, it's more than interesting.
More than interesting.
Prophetic.
That's right.
That's just
Well,
pathetic.
I think it just goes to show you too that God always has His way,
Yes.
and when
And that it's
the
always
enemy
cleverly
when
orchestrated.
when the enemy thinks I'm going to cut this off,
Right in front of our
I'm gonna
face.
cut this
Full
off,
of the
right?
plot twist.
Yeah, I'm going to cut it off. God's
Plot
like,
twist,
oh,
Mary's
I've
descendant.
already gone around you,
Yeah.
It's so plain
Well, that
and simple.
and when you
And
consider,
we sometimes
Well, see,
complicate things.
when you trace Luke's lineage, say that 3 times
Yeah, a lot of
fast.
tongue twisters today.
When you trace that lineage, he takes you down 70 generations, right, to the Messiah. Whereas Matthew, he only goes like 42,
Oh.
right? So it's just interesting how you look at these different things, and
That's
I'm just thinking scholars of the day. But I'm just saying, scholars of the day could have actually technically come to the conclusion, oh, this was predicted, but the Messiah can't come now through David.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have thought, hey, we're hopeless now. And yet, God always has His ways, and life will prevail, and
What
truth will
looked
prevail.
impossible was not at all.
Well, and
What-
also the cleverness of it, because when you track the lineage of Jesus, it's not like a beautiful royal lineage. It's like, oh, he's basically the Rahab, the harlot's
Right, exactly.
offspring.
Exactly.
Bathsheba.
the adultery.
Yeah, which is
Bathsheba.
funny to think about too, because obviously that was an illegitimate situation that was totally wrong. Yet that was still the line that
Yeah.
God comes
God
from.
still used it.
Goes,
Doesn't
Goes
that
to really
say
show the
something
love.
to our
yeah, the love
Yeah.
of God
the love, yeah.
to work around.
Well, and that he
Love.
really went through the
Yeah.
most depraved channels to get here.
Exactly.
And then he comes out at like one of the worst times in ancient history, and then
There you go.
the height of oppression and
And
Judaism.
he made it happen. I mean,
Yeah.
as a man, he made it happen because he had that connection with his father, and because of that covenant relationship that they had, and the faith that both had in each other.
The trust, yeah. Faith and trust.
It worked,
Mm.
and it provided an opportunity for every human being
Mhm.
to jump on the salvation train.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a true at-one-ment is.
Mm-hmm.
They had a true at-one-ment relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what it had to happen.
And Jesus was allowed to make that choice.
Yeah,
That's how much He loved us and loves us.
yeah.
Our Creator and our
Yeah.
Redeemer.
And what he gave up is more than most Christians can even imagine.
Oh. Right.
Well, I mean, it's more than any Christian can imagine, but I mean, more than what they know anyway.
Right.
So,
Well, on that note, we can close out, and we'll figure out what we're doing next week, whether that's Simeon leading us in Job, or somebody going to Isaiah, or
we'll be in the Word
find
somewhere.
out.
We'll be in the Word someplace.
So we'll
It'll
close
be
out in prayer.
it'll be a delightful surprise.
Find out next week. Find out
Find out next
what
week.
you're
We
studying.
gotta keep that. Have to have a little mystery, right? And built
Leave them
into
on a
the
cliffhanger.
from one, a little cliffhanger from one to the next.
Yeah,
So,
we'll go ahead and close out in prayer.
okay.
Lord, we thank you so much for the Sabbath. Thank you for a time to be together, to be studying your word, and we ask that you would help these things to plant themselves in our hearts and in our minds, that you would help us to understand them with more clarity, and that you would help us to more resemble your Son in every way that we can. Help us to strengthen others and to empower others to follow you as well, and give us the words to speak at the times they need to be said, and help lead us into those divine appointments that you have planned for us. And pray for the food as well, that you'll bless our time together as a family, and that you'll bless those who were able to tune in online with us as well, and that you will help prepare us for the times ahead, and that you will give us the same spirit that your Son utilized. This we ask and pray in the name of your Son.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, thanks once again for joining in and tuning in. And nice to have you here, always, of course. And we pray that God will continue to bless throughout the rest of the day and the rest of the week, of course, so that you can come right back here next week, homechurch.us. We'll see you then. Have a great week, everyone.